guys, so this is Gomer. He is an Arabian gelding who the vet thinks is about 9 years old. He was recently adopted by one of my friends from an Arabian rescue, and the Arabian rescue picked him up from a kill pen. So we assume he was taken to that kill pen because of this injury on his front left leg. You can see how he holds it out in front in all of these pictures. For the most part, he's in pretty good shape. He's not too skinny. He seems to have been reasonably well taken care of, but he does have this pretty significant injury of that front left leg. And here I'll show you a video of him walking so you can see how he manages with that injury. You'll watch how he can't really extend that knee all the way or his fetlock, and he kind of flings it forward as he goes. So that's pretty typical of what you will see in a horse that has a radial nerve injury. So let's talk a little bit about where the radial nerve is, what it does, how it gets injured, before we go more into Gomer's story. In this next picture, I have the radial nerve highlighted there in green and then outlined in red, so you can see how it comes down from the brachial plexus to the front of the front leg. So you can imagine how that nerve could be injured by something like a kick or getting caught up in a fence or something like that. In short, the radial nerve innervates our triceps, our carpal extensors, and our digital extensors. So that's our elbow extensors, is the triceps, plus a couple of other muscles. Carpal is our knee joint, and then our digital extensors, that encompasses the fetlock, the pasture, and the coffin joints. So if you want more detail, here's our detailed slide. This is all the muscles innervated by the radial nerve. We have the triceps, which is 3 parts. We got the long, lateral, and medial heads. We have the tensor muscle of the antebrachial fascia. And then we have the anconeus, which is a smaller muscle that is often overlooked. Then we have our carpal extensors, which include the extensor carpi radialis and the oblique carpal extensor. And the radial nerve also gets the lateral carpal flexor muscle. And our digital extensors are the common digital extensor muscle, which again has 3 heads, the humeral, radial, and ulnar heads. And then we have our lateral digital extensor muscle. So here I'm going to show you guys pictures of each of these muscles, kind of from an anatomy textbook. This is the ABC of the Horse Atlas, which is something I highly recommend if you're at all interested in equine anatomy. So the first one is our triceps muscles. The triceps is made up of 3 parts, which is our long head, that's that first one, our lateral head, the second picture, and then the medial head, that's the third picture, and then this 4th picture is all 3 of them together that make up the whole triceps. So the triceps is our main mover for extending the elbow joint. The next muscle we'll look at is the tensor fascia antebrachii. So this muscle helps extend the elbow joint and also helps a little bit with flexing the shoulder joint. Then we have the anconeus, which is this little guy that helps the triceps out with extending the elbow joint. Next up we have our carpal extensors. So the first one is extensor carpi radialis, and that's going to extend the carpus and also help a little bit with flexing at the elbow joint. Then we have the extensor carpi ulnaris, also called the lateral carpal flexor muscle, and that one actually helps with flexing the carpus in the horse. In humans, it extends a little bit at the wrist, and we get something called ulnar deviation, but the horse doesn't have ulnar deviation, so it just kind of helps with flexion instead. Our final carpal extensor muscle is the oblique carpal extensor muscle, which you can see here. And then last but not least, we have our digital extensors. So this common digital extensor muscle here extends all of the joints of the distal limb. And then we have our lateral digital extensor muscle that extends a little higher up at the knee joint and at the fetlock joint. When we have a radial nerve injury, we can be talking about a couple of different things, and it depends on where the nerve is injured. So a high radial nerve injury is going to impact all of those muscles involved with the radial nerve. So that's our elbow extensors, carpal extensors, and digital extensors. So this is a condition where the horse is usually going to be totally unable to put weight on that involved leg, and the prognosis is not so great. We can also have a low radial nerve injury where the triceps is not impacted and only the carpal and digital extensors are involved. So horses in this condition are usually able to take weight through that leg, and they have a much better prognosis. So this is kind of what Gomer looks like. He's able to put weight on his leg, but he is unable to extend at his knee and at his fetlock, so we think he has a low radial nerve injury. Now let's make things one step even more complicated. There are different types of nerve injuries. So we can have a Neurapraxia, an Axonotmesis, or a Neurotmesis, and those range from the least severe to the most severe types of nerve injuries. We'll start with the least severe first and talk about Neurapraxia. So this is when the nerve just gets stretched. Nothing is broken, the nerve is just stretched and irritated, and it's not conducting like it normally would. So this is kind of like when your leg or arms fall asleep because you've been sitting on it or sleeping on it weird. Full recovery is expected in a relatively short amount of time. The next condition is an axonotmesis. This is a little more severe. The nerve sheath that the axon travels through is still intact, but the axon, which is the part that's actually transmitting the information from the limb to and from the brain, is broken. So full recovery here is possible because that axon is guided by the nerve sheath as it tries to regrow, but nerves grow very slowly, so the recovery time we expect is going to be a little bit longer. The third option for nerve injury is going to be neurotmesis, and this is where that entire nerve is severed. So the nerve sheath is severed and the axon is also broken into two pieces there. So prognosis for full recovery in these kinds of cases is very poor. Like I mentioned, nerves grow very slowly, and without that nerve sheath intact to guide the direction of the axon's growth, that axon is just kind of growing out there, searching for something to meet up with, and it may never meet up with anything. It may run into another nerve, which can kind of give you some partial recovery in function, but the expectation with neurotmesis is that we're not getting any recovery in muscle function after these injuries. Now, one step even further, each nerve is made up of a bunch of different axons. So if we have complete severing or neurotmesis of the entire nerve, all the axons in the nerve, then we're going to get complete paralysis of all of those innervated muscles. On the other hand, we can have complete severing, neurotmesis, of just part of the nerve, so only some of the axons, and then that's going to give us partial loss of muscle function. So we could have either weakness of muscles that are innervated, or we could have just loss in certain muscles and not others. So our friend Gomer here, just to recap, we're thinking we're dealing with a low radial nerve injury, and I always operate under the assumption that we're not getting any muscle function back. That way, if I do get some recovery in muscle function, it's a happy surprise, but since we can't see in there, we can't see the nerve damage, I just operate under the assumption that we're dealing with the worst case scenario. So we'll teach him how to compensate, we'll do some hoof care to keep him as balanced as possible and allow him to stand more square, and we'll strengthen all of those muscles that do still have healthy innervation to help him get around a little bit better. So speaking of hoof care, I'll show you first what his hooves looked like before the farrier was out. I suggested that they get hoof care for this horse before we started any real physical therapy treatment, just because of how bad his hooves were, for lack of a better word. This is his right front foot. You can see how long and how much excessive growth there is. This is a skyline kind of view of that right front, and you can see that big extra flare on that inside wall. The grass is kind of in the way on the outside wall, but he's having to rock over that extra flare every time he walks, and it's just making things a lot harder for him. Here's another view of that right front hoof. So you can just imagine with that hoof being so long and kind of underrun, how much extra strain he's having on things up the leg, trying to walk over that hoof. And then on the flip side, we have the left one. This is the one with the nerve injury. And because he is unable to get the knee and the fetlock extended, he's developed this kind of club foot shape on his left front. So it's very upright and short compared to the other side. So this is something that you might hear referred to as high-low syndrome, where you have a really high clubby foot on one side and a low underrun foot on the other side. And this is a great example of that, a very extreme example of that. Then this last picture is from the front, and it shows you just his like preferred stance at that time. So he always had his right hind behind, which again is leading to that underrun shape, and he always has his left front significantly out in front, which again leads to that upright kind of clubby shape. So form follows function. How he stands is going to impact what his hooves look like. And then here is that video of before walking. Just to remind you what he looked like. This is before we had any hoof care done. And then this is after. I apologize for the video being blurry, but you can see how much better this is after just one trim. I wish I could say this is after his PT treatment, but this is after his first hoof trim only. The people taking care of him have been doing a little bit of stretching with him in the meantime, but we haven't started any real serious PT stuff yet. This is just with the trim. So this is really encouraging for me, and I think that shows that we'll be able to get a lot more accomplished than maybe we thought originally, just seeing how he walked before we had his hooves done. So we get started with his physical therapy treatments this weekend, and I'm really excited to see how he does after that. I'll make sure to give you guys updates as we go. I'm going to post here a picture with the GoFundMe link that they're using to fundraise for Gomer's care and rehab process. It's an expensive process, and they can use any help that you guys are able to offer. I know they would be very appreciative. So thank you so much for watching, and keep an eye out for more updates from Gomer.